Hello everyone, this is update for November 28, 2022, day 278 of the war, end of the date update. As always, we're going to start with the general sort of strategic items, and then we're going to switch to Ukraine and switch to battlefield. As I mentioned yesterday, we're going to cover Wagner Group tactics on the battlefield to better understand why they are successful so far, even though they pay high price, but they can afford to do so. So now let's just start with China. That's just sort of our beloved topic. As you can see now on mainstream media, there's a lot of social unrest there going on. So the sort of this implosion of the Chinese economy becoming much more clear, much more visible, and it's getting into the sort of next stage of social unrest. And as I mentioned before, I think about months ago, when the new Chinese president was reelected, that essentially this new group is sort of bankrupt, economically bankrupt. And by that I mean that they have no strategic plan how to fix the broken system. And the two pillars of the Chinese economy are a real estate asset bubble that finances internal consumption. That is broken there in China. And the second one is export, which is, typical your mercantilist approach, where, you buy commodities, you cheaply process them and export mainly to the US, some to Europe, so essentially to the West. And you earn profit, and then you reinvest, rebuild your industry, and improve sort of standard of living in the country. That model is also broken at this point. So essentially nothing, and I'm not saying that's completely not working, but it essentially cannot continue its growth the way it used to. China was used to grow to like 6-8% per year GDP. Now that growth is sort of gone, not possible. And the problem is that during all of this, let's say since at least 2008, China as a country decided to lever itself up, basically go in debt to increase consumption and to do all sort of to basically blow this real estate bubbles. And now that ability is not there as well. So essentially all of these debt bubbles, they need ever increasing amount of sort of debt to continue its existence. Kind of like a pyramid scheme from, if you really think about it. And if you don't have new oxygen and in ever increasing numbers oxygen coming out there, that pyramid starts to crumble and fall apart. And so this is what we're seeing right now, early stages of that. The start of the process was actually, let's say, summer of last year, early fall, where, if you remember, there was Evergrande, I think that's the name of the Chinese developer, that started falling apart. That was just the first sort of, first kind of like, how do they call it? First bird that was flying out. But now the things are kind of like a domino effect, started to fall apart. Just to add to this sort of general information is, for example, Volkswagen and FAW, which is basically joint venture with Volkswagen in Chengdu, stopped production. This is in China. This is just another showing that the economy is going into this, call it like heart attack moment there, closer and closer. So that's, again, putting a lot of pressure on Chinese president on how to address this. And since they are sort of have no strategy, no vision how to change economy and how to move forward in like non-extensive way. That's how China was developing, but in intensive way, because it's simply impossible under communist regime, because it's, even though things are cheap from China, the largely any kind of communist regime is super inefficient. So you cannot really So the only way they can sort of grow and develop through extensive way. They cannot grow through intensive way. And so as a result, as I said, he has no vision, no strategy what to do next. And the only way to release all of this negative energies that's being accumulated is, some external aggression. So even though I said that essentially China won, basically captured Taiwan without, shooting a bullet, that's probably going to happen as I said, in 2024. So, but pressure is now, so remains to be seen what the Chinese leadership will do. In the same time, a Chinese prime minister was negotiating today with Kazakhstan president. So basically, Kazakhstan is a major link between China and Russia, and and China made quite a bit of sort of inroads into Kazakhstan because it's also a large supplier of natural resources, which Chinese economy needs. So this is a little bit about China, small update there. Then actually I would like to switch to the US, where there is expectation, very strong expectation that Federal Reserve is done increasing rates. And today, Federal Reserve, one of the presidents, Ballard, came out and said, okay, they are not done by any means. They're not done normalizing economic climate in the US, and that interest rates are going to go to at minimum 5%, and on the higher end it's 7%, and stay there for at least entire 2023. So as you can see that there is sort of this very tightening policy from Federal Reserve to sort of regain control of the economy, because it's basically disintegrating in the US as well for different well, I would say that when the interest rates were at zero, this essentially means communism. It's you cannot call it like technically, but the sort of indirect result of it is essentially you have communism in the US, and wherever you have 0% interest rates. So basically entire sort of, we call it capitalist system, whatever you call this system or let's call it market system, stops working, and it's essentially turning into communism. So, and because of that, then society starts to disintegrate, because there is no incentive for anyone to sort of continue whatever they do, continue putting effort, let's put it this way. And so they understand that pretty well, and then they try to change this situation before it gets totally out of control, where no matter what they do, they will not be able to regain control. And this is the whole another reason why there is this push to increase rates by Federal Reserve, even though you can see that sort of inflation is definitely moderating, and probably will be moderating even more, but it's still not enough to fully kind of like take control of the economy. At the same time, another thing is happening, as I mentioned, because of all of this broken business models, not only China, but the same is true for, let's say, Germany, which is also similar to China, export-oriented economy, and even let's say UK and Japan, which is in the same camp as China and Germany. They all have negative foreign trade balances. What this means is before they had positive trade balances, and they would sort of that profit that they would earn, right? Like you have revenue minus expenses. Maybe we can simplify it. They would earn that profit. They would basically reinvest in the US, because they earn profit mostly basically from the US, and they reinvest that money back into US. And what they would do, in most cases, with some exceptions actually, they would buy US government debt, which is called treasury. So basically a debt would support low interest rates, because when you buy government debt and then you reduce interest rate, because interest rate is the price for that debt. So as if you have more buyers, willing buyers of this debt, the price for the debt goes down, which means interest rate goes down. So now all of them have negative trade balances. What this really means is they essentially have to sell their savings. So basically, they go and say, okay, in a primitive, and I'm explaining in a primitive way, they go to U.S. government, say, okay, well, you know what, we need our money back, and we're gonna sell our debt on the market to other investors and get our cash and bring it back to home. What this does is that you have more sellers, then the price for the debt goes up, so interest rate goes up. So as you can see, there are two parallel processes that are happening. Is on one hand, U.S. Federal Reserve tries to get control from purely financial perspective of the whole U.S. economy, and then from the world perspective, global perspective, from economic perspective, there is also collapse of those business models, and they need their savings back. So they also sell U.S. debt. So and this creates environment for the rising interest rates from like a long-term perspective, from a strategic perspective, because there is a lot of sort of discussion that that we're going to go into deflation, and interest rates will go down to whatever 2%, 1% for 10-year treasuries. This is very unlikely scenario. What I think we may experience in general, that while the prices may go down for many things, and they started to going down, at the same time interest rates will be high and remain elevated, and may still go up significantly from where we are. So basically, this is going to be sort of totally different from the sort of typical expectation, because from the investors in 2008, when there was so-called flight to safety, where all of these international investors like Germany, Japan, they would go and buy U.S. government debt and reduce interest rates, especially on 10-year debt, which is called 10-year treasuries, to very low levels. And so that would sort of, to extent, help cushion sort of the whole situation. So we might be in a situation where this is gonna it's not gonna play out the same way, and it's actually gonna play out in a way that's completely unexpected by most investors, where you have like technically inflation going down, but interest rates remain high and even go higher. And that's going to create extremely painful scenario, much more painful than 2008 and 9, that what we observed that during that basically crash. So this is just about a little bit about the macroeconomy, where we probably all going in general. In terms of now, let's switch to energy, and then we'll obviously talk Russia, because it's all almost Russia is sort of in many ways synonym to energy. So first, there's going to be a meeting on December 4th of the OPEC Plus, which means including Russia, where they probably going to reduce crude oil production to keep the prices high. So again, this goes again to this whole idea. Okay, demand starts to sort of soften for the crude oil, but at the same time, all of these countries, producers, they trying to maintain, reduce actually output. And especially Russia is willing to do it. They have sort of nothing to lose essentially at this point. And for them, if you look strategically, it's even better to reduce outputs by, let's say, 2 million barrels per day out of, like, let's say 11 that they produce right now. And they basically will maintain essentially the same amount of flow of, let's say, US dollars or euros, and they work less essentially, right? So you work less, get the same. Makes a lot of sense for them for now. At the same time, because of all of this, deteriorating situation in Russia from financial perspective, as I mentioned, so even this sort of artificial exchange rate that's sort of, maintained by basically it's not market, but sort of kind of appear that we have appearance of the market, that exchange rate start to go down as well. So before it was like under under 50, under 60 rubles per US dollar. Now it's strongly above 60. It's 62, pushing towards 63, and for euro it's like 64. So you see the trend is also, so the FX market sort of realizing that Russian economy is essentially falling apart. The export of natural gas is essentially that, which kind of removes significant portion of the FX flow into Russia. So, and then crude is also under big threat, a lot of problems. All of that discount that I mentioned yesterday, that Russian crude now selling for $52 per barrel. So this all reflects, and then also taking into account all of this deficit spending by the Russian government, state budget also being in deficit. So things there is sort of perfect economic / financial storm brewing in Russia. It's not going to happen, December. It's probably not going to happen in January, but I think February, March, there is very high possibility of significant sort of financial sort of earthquake or some problems in Russia, because a lot of also internal industry will be dead by then. So the economic problems will be spreading and multiplying there in Russia. Just for those who sort of like, I don't know, I call it supporters of Russia, or thinking that this is unbalanced. Just to be fair, Ukraine totally wiped out. There's zero there left. It's essentially, its economy is dead. There's nothing left, and country basically barely surviving at this point. Almost on the verge of large flow of refugees back to Europe, which, even though the statistical numbers from Ukrainian border guards are not supporting now, this idea of large flow of the refugees from Ukraine. Yes, there is more coming than leaving the country, but the numbers are not huge, not large. It's just slight increase, but things are just starting. I will talk about that a little bit more once I finish sort of this conversation about the energy in Russia. And then another interesting development in Russia. So Russian government decided to use prisoners for the work on military factories. So this is Russia more and more basically going to this Stalin economy of World War II, essentially, and even the way it's rationalized, which is for those who actually support, like view Russian leadership as sort of humane and having whatever family values and all that stuff. So just just so you understand how the people are really viewed there in Russia as expendable material. So the idea is like, okay, we have planned to reduce, the idea is sort of call it noble idea, to reduce number of population in the prison. And then the logic is the following. Okay, well, we need to get to this, like, I think 300,000 imprisoned people by, let's say, 2030. So what we can do there is we're going to send them to all of these military factories where many of them will die, or they will send them to Wagner, into Wagner Group where they all die. And so this way we're going to achieve our plan. So I hope you realize that you probably don't want to live in a country like that, because all of that, those so-called family values that they mention, it's just empty declaration, because the family in Russia itself is under extreme pressure and in extremely bad sort of shape, because there is extremely high level of alcoholism because of the difficult life sort of conditions, and I'm not talking about Moscow or St. Petersburg, like those let's say handful of large cities, but the rest of the Russia is basically in a way kind of like dying off essentially. So that's just not consistent with this declared sort of family values, let's put it this way. Then actually now let's switch to Ukraine, see what's going on there. So Ukrainian electricity distribution network is, I would say, in agony at this point, sort of dying on its own from the wounds that are being inflicted by Russian attacks. So, for example, there is a power generation facility in this sort of southeastern part of Vinnytsia region. I think it's called Ladizhin, and so something happened there. We don't know all of the details, but essentially, like this probably transformer blew up from intense use, that it's not not capable to sustain that intensity, and so they're entire city without heat, without electricity, and basically there's a state of emergency. 18,000 people there. So the system is sort of starting to disintegrate, as I said, on its own, even without further Russian attacks, essentially. So, for example, in Kyiv, many living in this high-rise apartment buildings is essentially like a death traps, where people have electricity for let's say 1 to 2 hours per day, totally random. Then there is essentially sometimes no heat. The sewage doesn't work, so you cannot go to the toilet. So all of this, the heat comes for like 3-4 hours in 24-hour period. So it's essentially the only reason it's there, so that the water, which is the main agent to carry heat through the building and to heat the building, doesn't freeze and the pipes don't blow up. So they basically, you don't get any heat. So, and it's it's cold, it's winter, there's snow on the streets. So living in this apartments is nearly impossible. You cannot even cook anything. So you basically, this is, I would say, horrific conditions to live right now. And as I said, the system has not stabilized. It's basically slowly dying, let's put it this way. And if there is one more Russian attack like the previous one on 23rd, it probably will put it to the sort of final sort of rest, the whole system. And as I said, it will disintegrate into islands. And I'm sure Russia will continue attacking those islands to kind of completely put the entire of the Ukraine into darkness. On a relative scale, things are better in the western sort of part of the country. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they definitely in better situation. So like Lviv region is better, Chernivtsi, then Ivano-Frankivsk, Ternopil, Khmelnytsky. So they kind of like at the line, sort of like separation lines, sort of kind of like goes somewhere starting this Volyn, Rivne region, and then it's kind of like Khmelnytsky region, and then this whole area is a little bit better. And the more to the west, the better it is. And the worst is obviously Kyiv region, sort of like Zhytomyr region. It's total disaster, pretty much complete disaster there. Part of the Cherkasy region. So that's a situation with the electricity distribution system in Ukraine. Now let's actually do walks through the front line, and once we get to the North Donbass, then I'll discuss in detail the Wagner Group tactics and how everything works there and why they are successful, so people better understand, when I explain sort of more in abstract ways, like why they are better. So the situation along the state border is more or less quiet, more or less stable. Nothing major is going on. Now let's move to North Lugansk front line. Things here are the same. No Russian sort of attacks or counterattacks, only 2 Ukrainian attacks in the same location. Both are not successful and essentially didn't lead to Now it's actually moved south to North Donbass front line. Let me actually mention something here. So kind of Russian troops, or Wagner mercenaries to be more precise, started fighting in this village Spirne, which is stronghold. So they actually made progress here, and the fighting is going somewhere in the village. So there is some progress here. It's happening. Then, typical attacks: Yakovlivka, Soledar without much success, Bakhmut without much success. Actually, let me show you. This is kind of like, some of you may have seen this pictures, but this is how it looks. The front line looks, all of this near Bakhmut essentially, and a little bit south of Bakhmut. So as you see, it looks totally like World War One, and this was a little bit earlier when there was a lot of rain. So now it's turning into sort of more colder weather, which actually is better, which totally misunderstood in the West, that the colder weather is actually better environment for to survive, let's say, or to provides better conditions for soldiers, let's put it this way, because this is, as you can see, you living in total mud here. So now actually let me start this discussion about Wagner Group tactics. So as you can see, this was from Ukrainian media, and what this is essentially a picture screenshot from the dead leader of the one of the Wagner assault groups. This was on his tablet, and this is a plan of attack. That's sort of this not. This is just he was this is one of the groups. So as you can see, different colors are for different assault groups. So essentially, these attacks are, and each dot indicates individual soldier, right? So as you can see, it's all super detailed planned. So this is one of the advantages of the Wagner mercenaries is it's actually excellent planning, and that's why one of the strong strengths of them that's not typical for regular Russian army, not typical for Ukrainian army. Then the other important point is excellent coordination between groups, and also artillery support and UAV support. So they do operate like a one living thing, and that really makes their attacks extremely dangerous and extremely lethal to Ukrainian defenders. So now that's actually kind of like I'll talk a little bit about assault groups. So each assault group typically about 8-12, like basically they vary in sizes, but usually it's 8 to 12 soldiers or 30 to 50 soldiers. And then this assault groups, then the attacking force essentially comprises of several assault groups. They are narrowly sort of focused on, they sort of, they accumulated against a very narrow section of the Ukrainian front line. And each group has its own leader with a detailed plan of the attack, who then obviously directs soldiers under him in very detailed fashion. And essentially each assault group has its own UAV. Typically it's Mavic 3 or Matrix by DJI, which is Chinese company. And as you can imagine, the relationship within China and Russia are perfect. They're allies, so you have a lot of support from that perspective. And essentially, that's another advantage of the Wagner Group. Technologically, it's very advanced and extremely well equipped. So it's not just your, let's say, regular Russian army or regular Ukrainian army where everybody relies on sort of volunteers donating equipment. Government doesn't buy anything. Wagner mercenaries are extremely well equipped in terms of UAVs and technologically. So what happens? These groups start to move under this commander, and UAV actually kind of like tracks movement of members of the group, and translates everything to the command point that's behind them. So basically, commanders are tracking everything and directing everything in real time. And essentially, you have like streaming service to the commanders of this whole entire assault force. And they first, what happens is these UAVs, they go first. They how to say, hover over Ukrainian defensive lines. Try to sort of see any potential threat. Any kind of like heavy infantry weapon, anything that sort of can create problems for the group, that then in real time they translate it to the sort of this command post. Then command post coordinates mortar fire. Usually it's 82 millimeter mortars or 120 millimeter mortars, and they also use automatic grenade launchers, which is typical is 30 millimeters, but Russia also now has more and more of 40 millimeters grenade launchers. So they coordinate fire against whatever identified Ukrainian sort of like how to say, backbone of Ukrainian defense. Let's say if it's machine gun nest or anything that can create a problem for the advancing Russian assault group. They try to eliminate it, not always successful. Then, even they're not successful, the soldiers, regular soldiers, are sort of being kind of like directed, okay, attack no matter what. And the idea is speed is your survival, right? Rely on the speed to get as quickly as possible to Ukrainian trenches, get into trenches and, start fight there. So in some way, it's also, typical tactic. There's a lot of, in this tactic from the Soviet infantry in World War II, with the exception, obviously, of coordination and UAVs and all of that stuff. But the, support of this mortar fire, and then, jumps through this sort of like field of fire no matter what, and get to the trenches and then initiate fight there. It's typical, it was actually typical of Soviet panel companies and battalions, and you cannot actually retreat. If you try to retreat, you're going to get shot on the spot by the leader of the group. The only people who are allowed to retreat are wounded. And in many cases, even if you're wounded, you do it on your own. So there's no sort of as much dedicated resources to retreat. You have to get to the rear on your own. Sometimes you get help, but in many cases you don't get help. And this is actually exactly how the Soviet army operated in World War II. So basically, then there's this quick jump into Ukrainian trenches, and they basically overwhelm defenses. And in many instances, Ukrainian infantry just retreats, and and that's how they, from time to time, you see that they capture Ukrainian defensive positions on strongholds. Another important part, how it's all, from sort of a little bit like stepping up, a little bit bigger picture, like higher level tactics. So how it's planned is first, the command post of this whole assault force will send this UAVs to hover over Ukrainian defensive stronghold. So they narrowly. So first of all, going to go back. They narrowly select, some stronghold, very narrow section of Ukrainian sort of front line, and they just hammer non-stop for days in the same area. And the way it's done is, as I said, it's a very harassing. It's not just they send waves over the waves of the soldiers to die. It's done very differently. So they send UAVs, they spot, potential threats, potential problems for the infantry, for the Russian attacking infantry. It's being destroyed by Russian artillery, mortar fire, sometimes this automatic grenade launchers. Once they believe they soften it enough, then this assault force, which comprises several assault groups, attacks on very narrow section of front line, and they try to get over this open area as soon as possible without regard to the casualties to the group. And that's one of the reasons why they do sustain very heavy casualties, but they don't sort of this is disregarded by the sort of the top of the Wagner Group, because that's kind of like their operating sort of model. So and so again, this is how it's done. And if it's not successful, these attacks are being repeated sort of day after day, day after day. Basically, they exhaust defenders, and because Ukrainian command is not flexible, so the same people will stay in the same area. Eventually, they just get exhausted because you're getting attack after attack after attack, and you just eventually this scrambles, right? Even from that perspective. So the whole operating model is extremely carefully sought out in terms of fatigue of the defenders. First trying to destroy the most dangerous heavy infantry weapons, and then fatiguing defenders, and using coordination of the UAVs, mortar support, automatic grenade launchers, and just plain infantry. And in terms of armor, they essentially never use any armor to support these attacks. So it's all pretty much done by just infantry. And you can even say this is really light infantry attacks. They purely assault groups, probably how they were in World War I, essentially. And as I said, these groups, they sustain heavy losses, but the reason it's they not losing fighting capabilities after a while, because that's what you would expect. It's essentially you have a skeleton crew in each assault force, where you have commanders, top commanders, and then sort of specialists who don't really go into they do go in attack, but they're not in the most dangerous sort of position. So for the most cases, they survive. So basically, the skeleton crew survives, but all of this, prisoners, they basically, used as a shockwave, and they all die and they washed out. And then, then you get new group of these prisoners who basically are, tightly controlled by these commanders, and then they send again into attack. And so this is this kind of human waves, how actually Soviet army operated in World War II. So again, this was all borrowed from the World War II experience of the Soviet army. And so as you can see, this all kind of creatively updated using sort of modern technological equipment such as UAVs and improving coordination, but at the core, it's Soviet World War II infantry approach. And so, as I said, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday or whatever, a couple days ago, the whole point, and let me actually move from here now, is actually in all of these attacks by Wagner mercenaries, the point is actually even clearly stated by the head Yevgeny Prigozhin, is not even so much of capturing territory as wearing out and killing as many as possible Ukrainian defenders. So what you do, this is just also very calculated strategy. You exchanging all of these prisoners, which I mentioned before, that it's viewed as low quality human material, or basically burden for the Russian society. So use your burden to destroy better quality human material on the opposite side. That's how the strategy is playing out in all of these fights. And so, as I said, it's not even so much about capturing this Bakhmut. That's not the main goal. The main goal is to kill as many capable and motivated Ukrainian soldiers as possible. And now hopefully you understand that it's very flexible system, very, I would say, agile and adaptable system, and extremely capable, because it can concentrate the forces where it's needed very quickly, and they coordinate, you coordinate mortar fire, artillery, and infantry attack using UAVs. So this multiplies this sort of penetration effect by this whole assault force, and regular army, Soviet army, cannot put up effective defense against such approach. And so that's why even if Ukrainian soldiers motivated, eventually they either get killed or fatigued, and the defenses are get breached. And so this again goes to the idea that this is that Ukrainian side has a strategic dead end, and they will not be able to withstand to this strategy unless it's actually Ukrainian army changes and turns into something similar, where it's more entrepreneurial, because this is at the core of this. It's very entrepreneurial and not disempowered like how it is right now in Ukrainian army. And the problem with that is that that the Ukrainian top, or in the Ukrainian military, is scared, and Ukrainian also political top is scared to empower lower level sort of soldiers, because they understand that they're incompetent and they could be sort of kicked out. And so they, in some ways, they're more afraid of this grassroots Ukrainian soldiers than, in a way, this Wagner mercenaries, because they believe that this is all contained to this Bakhmut area, and eventually it all fizzles out, and somehow it all will sort of die off. Looking at Yevgeny Prigozhin, I don't think it's gonna sort of die off. He has a lot. He's an excellent entrepreneur. We have to give him a credit for that. Yes, he is extremely sort of how to say, inhumane, right? So he's from a moral perspective, he's completely wrong. At the same time, he created deadly machine that really works and way superior to the organizational system of Ukrainian army and Russian army as well. Doesn't matter. And to be fair, probably would be superior to most Western armies as well. The only difference is they don't have as much sort of firepower and everything, and technologically they would still be sort of inferior to them, and so they probably wouldn't have as much success. But this is what's going on, and this situation will continue to deteriorate here. There's also some information that the number of these Wagner mercenaries in this area, at least 23,000 soldiers. So as you can see, this is almost like call it like 2 Soviet divisions at this point, like full blown, not just this sort of call it like pocket Russian divisions, I would call, or toy Russian divisions that are not really like true real divisions how they were in World War II or World War I. This is a pretty significant sort of sort of system here, and Wagner mercenaries, they don't have shortage of new fresh sort of cannon fodder, right? They have plenty of it. They try to increase number of it, so things will continue to deteriorate. And so they do, as I sort of mentioned. So today there are Russian reports, and they might be wrong, but I would say they're probably more correct than not. That Wagner mercenaries essentially, penetrated Ukrainian front line here near Kurdyumivka, and then they essentially captured Ozaryanivka, this village, and then tiny village or hamlet near Kurdyumivka. It's called Zelenopilya. So as you can see, Ukrainian front line at this point, south of Bakhmut, in, I would say, defensive positions, are in complete disarray and sort of in a way due for straightening up and basically like sort of larger retreat, which unfortunately will open Bakhmut to the sort of flanks outflank from the south, and from the north east it's already somewhat. So basically it's going to create more difficult situation around Bakhmut and will bring moment closer to when Russian troops will be able to capture Bakhmut or force withdrawal of Ukrainian troops under the threat of encirclement. So again, there is no answer within Ukrainian system to this approach. And in a way, to just reiterate, to create answer, Ukraine needs to change. And those changes are extremely painful. And they essentially require changing Ukrainian top. So, and that's what the nature of the war. It forces you to change in significant ways or die. So this is this kind of situation. This is exactly that situation here around Bakhmut. Now let's move south. Let's see what's going on the central Donbass front line. So here the same sort of broken record. Russian troops are attacking from this Novomakhmudivka salient, then from Pisky salient. So far, nothing to report in terms of advances. Basically hitting the wall there. Then also attacks south of Novomikhailivka, and also without much success there. Now let's move to Zaporizhya front line, and things here are super stable, super quiet, no changes here. Russian side reporting that Ukrainian command is accumulating forces north of Orikhiv. I would be very skeptical, because right now I think Ukrainian military has this burning hole around Bakhmut, where probably some of those reserves will be sent. And probably what's going to happen there is that Ukrainian command will try to do this suicidal, useless, and futile, and I would say criminally insane counterattack in the typical way that will lead not to nowhere against the Wagner's mercenaries, but will create a lot of losses and deaths on the Ukrainian side. So that's probably where everything goes at this point. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow. Bye bye.